Welcome everyone to the Liverpool Daily News. Today, myself and Ben are going to touch on the game yesterday against Bayern Munich, which obviously ended in a narrow 4-3 defeat for Liverpool. We're not going to look at necessarily the big talking points from the match. They will have been covered yesterday, not least on Blood Red content. So we're going to look at some of maybe of the more alternative angles from the game. And Ben, I want to start with the set pieces because everybody, I think, focused understandably on how open Liverpool looked from open play. But they also gave up a huge chance for Benjamin Pavard from a set piece, which he somehow didn't score. And then one of Bayern's goals, I believe, came from a set piece as well. That was an area where Liverpool were weaker last year compared to previous seasons. So was it a concern to see that exploited again by Bayern?
Not particularly. I mean, if you look at the goal that Bayern conceded, it wasn't Liverpool's first choice 11 that was out there. I think the whole result itself, you shouldn't take too much into it just because for 75 minutes, I thought Liverpool dominated Bayern's strongest 11 probably and were 3-2 up. Probably it should have been 3-1 up. I think one of the Bayern goals was definitely offside, if not both. So I think pre-season you can't read too much into things. Bayern clearly capitalized on Liverpool having wholesale changes, and obviously that throws the balance of the set pieces as well. I'm sure before Liverpool would have had everyone on a player, whereas when you know there's a lot of changes, maybe the players are confused who's marking who. So I think I wouldn't read too much into it. Like I wouldn't read too much into the result as well. I think overall, when Liverpool did have their strongest 11 out, we looked good, and I thought we dominated Bayern, and I thought we could have scored a few more goals as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things Jurgen Klopp said was concentration waned in a few moments, and maybe set piece is a good example of that. And when the season actually starts, players are going to be more switched on to any kind of threats on that front. One point they made in commentary that I thought was quite interesting was that Bayern have signed a centre back for the last 5 years in a row, and there's obviously various reasons for that. But when you look at Liverpool, they've got obviously Van Dijk, who came in 2018. Matip, I think, was 2016. Gomez maybe the year before that as their kind of four centre halves. Canate, obviously, the one who came in a bit more recently. But it feels as if Liverpool could almost learn from that example a bit. Obviously, they need a centre back this year. Could you argue that almost in a similar way to midfield that department has been neglected a little bit?
I wouldn't say so over the last few years because Liverpool's defenders have been really good. Definitely when Konate came in, we needed Konate at the time. Probably when Lovren left as well. I thought Liverpool were leaving themselves a little bit too short. But I think really other areas of the pitch were also kind of a priority for Liverpool at the time. And obviously, given Liverpool's budget, you do have to prioritize other things. Has the defense been a little bit forgotten about? I think maybe this summer you can make the argument just because there's such a pressing need for midfielders. No one necessarily addresses the need for a defender, but I think definitely right now there is room for another defender to come in, especially on that left-sided role. But based on Matip's form as well, I think I'm starting to have some concerns in the right-sided centre-back role as well. And obviously in this new formation, there's potentially a room for a centre-back who can maybe play as a left-back as well. Given I think Andy Robertson has struggled to adjust to Trent moving to midfield. And I'm sure with time he will get better, but maybe Liverpool would be better off if they brought in someone who can sort of move in and out of the left back and the left-sided centre-back position.
Yeah, I think especially in the case of Matip, it looks like all those injuries that he's had over the years are finally catching up with him. He was somehow able to kind of put that moment off, but I think it's arrived now, unfortunately. One last point to touch on from the Bayern game before we move on to some transfers. Virgil van Dijk obviously scored for Liverpool in the first half. Some interesting comments from him afterwards about how he's hoping to be more clinical this season. Does it feel like a little bit of an untapped goal scoring weapon, that one? I mean, obviously Van Dijk will chip in with his maybe 3-4 goals a season, but given that he is so dominant, and given that he does have so many chances from set pieces, it feels like he could push on to sort of being right up there as like the top scoring defender in the Premier League, really.
Yeah, I think Liverpool haven't really had that since like Martin Skrtel scored a crazy amount of goals like back in the day. I think it was the 2013-14 season when he scored about 7 goals and 2 against Arsenal in the same game. I think he scored 2 doubles in that season. So yeah, I think you could probably make use of Van Dijk more, but then again, it's difficult to argue that Liverpool are not making enough use of set pieces because last season Liverpool we did score the most amount of set piece goals in the Premier League. I think it was joint with Fulham. So could there be an added threat now with Dominic Szoboszlai? Certainly, and I think definitely Szoboszlai will be aiming to put some of his cross corners, if he does take corners, to Van Dijk. I think we saw a bit of that against Bayern Munich. Obviously, Robertson was on the pitch, but Szoboszlai took a couple of corners, and one was quite threatening from what I remember, and it did go to Van Dijk, and Liverpool almost scored from that as well. So yeah, certainly, I think it's a difficult argument to make that Liverpool haven't tapped into it because we've already been one of the most dominant teams in the Premier League under Van Dijk from set pieces. But could we be even better? Definitely, I think with the players that are coming in, there's definitely going to be an added threat in terms of creating chances from set pieces.
Yeah, obviously Szoboszlai had that corner against Leicester, I believe it was, where he sort of aimed it into Matip, and I think there was a flick on from him and ended up resulting in a goal. So yeah, we'll leave it there for the Bayern game, but I'll move on to some transfer lines. Obviously, it's now been kind of confirmed that Levi Colwill has signed a new 6-year contract with Chelsea, so it feels as if Liverpool's potentially their top defensive target in an ideal world is now off the table, obviously. Colwill said that it was an easy decision to extend. Do you think it was? Do you think he was kind of racking his brain a bit, or do you think it was always the case that if he was going to play at Chelsea, there was never any question of Liverpool being able to muscle him for a deal?
He has to say that, doesn't he? I mean, it didn't seem like it was that easy of a decision when he was kind of flirting around with both Brighton and Liverpool as well a little bit. So obviously in an official interview after you just signed the contract, you have to say that it was an easy decision. But I think it was probably a bit more complicated, and that's why it probably dragged out for quite the large part of the summer until he actually did end up signing a contract. And by that time, I think he was kind of had been outpriced really by Chelsea. Brighton had already gotten a left-sided centre-back in his place. Liverpool, there's no question about it, just simply can't afford him. So in that sense, maybe by the time it came down to it, it was an easy decision because he didn't have any options left. But certainly before that, he was kind of flirting around with the idea of leaving.
Yeah, it certainly seemed like that. I think obviously, you never want to see players injured, but like the injury to Fofana seems to have opened the door for him to kind of nail down that starting role, and he'll hope to kind of do so and just not relinquish it. Obviously, the crazy thing about all this now is that come the first game of the season, Liverpool will probably be lining up against Colwill, and they'll probably see firsthand why they were so keen to sign him, depending on how that game goes. Yeah, so one final thing we want to touch on this morning. There was a report yesterday that an unnamed club had made a bid for Caicedo and seen it rejected. It's been confirmed that club isn't Liverpool. It looks like he's not necessarily going to be a target, but it's interesting still to compare him to Romeo Lavia, who is Liverpool's number one option in that position. Do you think it's better to go for someone like Lavia and then you've got a decent amount of money left to go and buy a centre-back? Or is there an argument for just saying, you know what, Caicedo himself is kind of a generational player potentially. He can protect your defence, just invest heavily in him. Do you think the right approach is to go for multiple players rather than almost invest in everything you've got remaining in one?
Yeah, I think obviously we kind of touched on how the defence is being neglected a little bit potentially this summer. So I think as much as I like Caicedo and as much as I think he's a great talent, it's a similar situation with Jude Bellingham, where Liverpool just can't really afford to go for one player, given the fact that there's limited finances. If you do sign Caicedo, the likelihood is there's not going to be enough to sign a centre back, unless you're going for someone like Ben Davies. But then, obviously we saw what happened with Davies. He didn't feature at all for Liverpool. So I think overall, Lavia makes more sense for Liverpool, and I think that's why Liverpool are kind of haggling with the price as well, because you want to get him for as cheap as possible, so that you have more room to spend elsewhere, potentially on maybe 2 more signings after Lavia, maybe a midfielder and a defender. And I think that's why it's been a little bit frustrating for fans in terms of Liverpool's haggling and not really offering up how much Southampton want. But there's a greater purpose to that, and I think given Liverpool's needs this summer, they simply just can't afford to spend big money on a one player alone. You kind of have to find the gems in the market who are maybe available for a little bit less, who are maybe not at their pinnacle at the stage where Caicedo or Bellingham is, but who have the potential to get there.
Yeah, I think if you look at Bellingham, so you combine that McAllister and Szoboszlai fee, it's probably pretty much in the region of what Real Madrid have paid Dortmund. But you got to think about raising the team kind of collectively rather than just looking at it in terms of one individual. And yeah, there has been some reports suggesting Liverpool do want a couple more after Lavia, and hopefully the third bid, which seems to be in the offing, is accepted, because like you say, Liverpool have really been playing hardball up to this point. But yeah, we'll leave it there for this morning's stream. Thanks everyone for joining us. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow for another stream. And in the meantime, remember to check out all the written content that goes up on liverpool.com today. But yeah, enjoy the rest of your day, everyone, and we'll see you tomorrow.